On the first day of class, I felt scared. On the first day of class, I felt scared, not nervous, but scared looking out at the room. The seats were arranged haphazardly, in clusters. No one had attempted to organize the room for me, nor did the faculty member who hired me show up to introduce me to the class, as they promised they would. Without a microphone, I would have to project my voice, something that I was not at all accustomed to. As a way of getting everyone to focus, we wrote together about a politics and art that were not beholden to the state. Given Trump's recent election, the subject was on a lot of our minds. What I remember most was a student responding to my question, how have and do artists position themselves beyond recognition, that they felt least recognized when they were referred to as it, rather than their preferred gender pronouns. The course was a disaster, but it seemed now an unavoidable one. The students, were they my students for that semester, were deeply dissatisfied with the institution itself. Most of them were paying up to $75,000 in annual tuition, and yet their studios were in utter disrepair. Netting had been installed along the ceilings to catch pieces of falling plaster. For some students, there was flooding in their studios. As adjunct faculty, I was not to blame, but I was on the front line of their justifiable resent. Many of the students didn't feel the need to take my class, didn't like the readings, and didn't care for the topic I had chosen. A colleague of mine who had taught a previous section of the course the semester before said that it demoralized her. She who was so strong and accomplished and brilliant. Supposedly, the class was stricken from the curriculum the semester after I taught it. I had applied to teach the course for cynical reasons. I wanted to be able to say that I had taught in the program, to put it on my resume, but also because my contract had not been renewed for the following year at the school where I was currently teaching full-time. As I prepared to teach the class, I was looking forward to it, particularly since I was able to bring visitors, many of whom were my friends, and visual artists and scholars whom I admired. Most of all, I was looking forward to creating an experimental and autonomous atmosphere befitting of a course devoted to intersections between art, critical theory, and contemporary socio-political discourse. But nothing went as planned. From the start, the students fought with each other. The students who didn't fight reported that they felt uncomfortable attending class, that it was distressing, especially given the political climate and concerns they had about their own standing in the program. I was asked by the faculty member who hired me to address what was happening and circumvent it if I could. As I saw it, part of the problem was the format. It was virtually impossible to hold a discussion with 50 people, so I broke the class into smaller discussions, effectively making one large class into 3 or 4, depending on attendance, which fluctuated from week to week. I remember a few of the students because they tried to help. I remember others because they were especially unhelpful. It has been revealed to me since the class that one student was vocally in opposition to my teaching the class and letting everyone who would listen know it. I remember another expressing amazement that I could, quote, eat so much shit. Following an artist's presentation, an artist who I would add speaks probably 10 times as fast as most people, and who, more importantly, has probably 10 times more ideas than your average academic lecturer. A student complained to me that the presenter's ums took up 20 minutes of the presentation. Did she want her money back? She also complained that the digital copies I had made of the readings were not clean enough, that I should order copies through the university and make them available if I could. Having never heard such complaints before, I didn't know what to say. Someone, perhaps the faculty member who hired me, told me that most of the students went on medication at midterm. I could feel the difference in the classroom, a kind of low-grade depression. Indeed, a welcome lethargy had set in. As attendance diminished, I felt the class get a little better, Finally, we could have a discussion together and hear one another. No longer were the students attacking each other. Some even seemed eager to hear what others and myself had to say. As this occurred, I felt a great relief. Throughout the class, I had asked students to volunteer to give presentations. When I announced that this would be a requirement for the class, I received many angry emails from students expressing that they did not feel comfortable presenting in front of the larger group, so what was originally required became optional. A particularly memorable presentation was when A brought us outside into the cold winter air of West Harlem, only blocks away from the Hudson River. A sat on a chair with a synthesizer powered by an extension cord extending from the window of our classroom to the sidewalk. The song he played, what he called an improvisation, was an attempt to address the relation of social death and anti-blackness raised by our readings. Not without irony, he recognized where we were standing on a little island of privilege within a sea of blackness, Harlem, the Mecca of the African American diaspora. During the performance, some of the students cried. I wondered at the time, and I wonder now, what the reason was for their tears. Was it for the song itself, something they heard in the song as it reflected something about A, or his relationship to our readings, or to where we were standing? Was it for themselves, for us, our sorry predicament in an inordinately privileged educational institution? Was it for Harlem, for the building under construction across the street that would inevitably intensify the already intense gentrification taking place? Was it for all of these things and more? In any other class, this would have been a breakthrough, the effective charge that might finally allow us to learn together. Instead, it being the end of the class meeting, the students would disperse with little comment about the performance or its relation to what we had read. Perhaps I should have asked questions, but I'm not sure I felt welcome to. Perhaps I should have been more insistent that we stay, or that we write to one another, or that there be some way of following up during the subsequent class meetings. Tears came, then a few inarticulate comments, then silence, cold and silence. I loved your installation, those geometric paper forms, and the writing you were doing about Arab identity and political despair, but you avoided me, would not meet my gaze. I was very interested in your installation interrogating Arab masculinity, the way you use such physical processes and such violent imagery, and yet you yourself seem so gentle. I was interested in your relationship to the occult, how you hung your work in that space sequestered from the rest of the gallery and painted the walls a dark violet. You were the only student I connected with. You seemed to want to rescue me, at least to prop me up. I only wish you hadn't reported what you were hearing the other students say about me. I wish I had gotten to know you. I loved your final work with the pulleys and plants and everything else. I wish I had gotten to know you too. I thought your poems were beautiful. They made me wish I had taught the course as a poetry workshop, if only so you and I could talk about poetry together. I wanted you to be my student. I wrote you exhaustive emails in response to your inquiries, and you only wrote me very short, scattered ones in return. I wanted you to be my student too, but you seemed insecure around me, like you had something to prove. I loved your work about masculinity and intimacy in mystical Islam, and your interest in storytelling. At the thesis show, you revealed that we shared a mutual friend, a former student of mine from another art program, and it became easier to talk with you and discuss your work, knowing where you were coming from. I wanted to do a studio visit with you, but you never contacted me. Perhaps it is my fault for not being more persistent. I wanted to write about your work, but you didn't stay in touch and seemed suspicious of many of the texts we read in the class, particularly their relationship to African American cultural politics. I remember during C's presentation about blackness and animality, you saying something like, "It felt too close." We did a studio visit together, and I tried to help you with your artist statement. Occasionally, I will get your newsletter. I hope that you're doing well. I did really like how you were negotiating fashion and art and thinking about photographic portraiture as a social practice. I remember how you focused on Wilderson's use of the word unflinching, how to focus on that detail seemed so brilliant as a way of reading his intentions. I remember we were supposed to talk about your videos, but we never did. The last time I saw you, I had been running and was walking by the studios. I told you how much I liked your photographs and wanted to talk to you about disability and gender. I said that your work seemed to be concerned with networks, but you said, as though to correct me, that it was concerned with nests. You seemed so happy after Sylvia Federici's visit. You said that her visit was the highlight of the class, with which I can't disagree. You had friends who were committed anarchists and had written a book about the subject of the course. I'm sorry you didn't speak in the class. I feel like everyone would have benefited from what you had to say. I remember how insecure you were and how bad I felt afterwards for not complimenting your work at your first year show. I gave you a poetry book as a peace offering, hoping you would offer yours in return, but never heard back from you. I tried to connect with you by attending a walkthrough of the first year show, but it didn't seem to matter. My presence felt intrusive, not part of the learning process, as I had hoped it would be.